Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. I'm well. Snowy in Ohio.
It's I was paddleboarding in Arizona yesterday. It was almost 80 degrees. So
Oh
so
my goodness.
just gonna rub it in a little. I see the white background before you. I'm trying not to have trauma. I believe that I lived in Michigan for decades. I believe I'm allergic to snow. So if you see me itching, you'll know that it's just because I see all the white stuff. So I'm just kidding, everyone. For those of you that live in the north, you have my greatest sympathy. There, it's beautiful from the inside. Okay. So Kelley Gunter is our first week of the Wednesday series host. So she wrote, "You have such a pretty face," and um, if you missed out the January recording, I'd invite you to take a look at that. There's also two videos that are posted on intherooms.com under Super Saturday Recovery Summit. She will also give you lots of resources on where you can find her. She's got some amazing support Facebook groups and other groups. So she'll tell you more about that. But please introduce yourself a little bit and then let's get going.
Yes, well, I'm Kelley Gunter, like you said, and I wrote the memoir, You Have Such a Pretty Face, which details my 243-pound weight loss. But I think more importantly, the trauma behind the reason for my addiction to food and my numerous cross addictions and my entire healing journey. And like you said last week, Tammy, or last month, it seems like last week, it does seem like I was just here. But last month, my whole series for the year is going to center around hope and the different pieces of healing. And last week we talked about hope standing. I say in my book that it stands for hold on, pain ends. And just to kind of recap for maybe if there were some people who weren't in last month's group or haven't seen it, we talked about coming out of 2020 and the pandemic and how difficult it was that to hear the whole world saying, oh, new year, new me. And here we are. It's just a turn in the page in my calendar book because I'm still stuck. And so many people felt that way. And the way that we process through that and get through that is to be able to say, we have hope. We have hope that things will get better. And our hope gets low sometimes. And so how do we jumpstart it back to life? That was pretty much the point of last month's message was, I said, we can jumpstart it back with CPR of hope, which is compassion for ourselves, compassion for other people, our perception of the situations, and our resiliency to be able to move forward. So today, though, I want to talk about the people we lose along the way. And I think that's such a powerful piece of recovery. It was a very crucial part of my recovery. And I think that the people that we lose along the way and how we deal with that is one piece of recovery that doesn't get enough attention. And I think that when it doesn't, that causes people to fall back or to reach for something different. And so it's such a crucial piece of it. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Because in my story, there were many, many innocent people caught in the crossfire of my addiction. And I think that's the same for all of us. There are people who were hurt by our mistakes and our behaviors when we were caught up in the blur of addiction. You know, when we're talking about being caught in the crossfire of addiction, bullets don't have names. And it hurts to get hit by the shrapnel of somebody else's painful mistakes. And so we lose some people. We lose people along the way because people eventually say, you know what? I've had enough. And so we go into recovery and we're trying desperately to obtain sobriety, or we're trying to maintain it and keep ourselves solid and whole. And yet we have these people who we loved very much who have cut ties with us in some situations. And that's very hurtful. I mean, we're in the worst time of our life. We're hurting, and we all know how fragile the beginning of recovery is and how many people lose it even in the first month. Now, I mean, it's just, and so here we are trying to deal with something that has caused us so much pain our entire lives, and then we're trying to deal with it without many of the people who loved us and the people that we counted on. And to dismiss that as a real issue is really problematic in the steps of recovery. So we go into treatment. I lost many, many people who I loved, and many people who said they loved me too. And so here we are in treatment, and we all know one of the first things we have to do is take responsibility for our actions, is be held accountable and say, this is my fault. These were my inappropriate behaviors, and I take responsibility for them. And so we're trying to do that. We have remorse, we have regret. We try to make things right. We try to make amends. But still somewhere in there, there's that voice inside of our heart and our soul saying, dang, though, I thought you loved me. And so here at my worst time, you just walk out. And so, but we're trying to take responsibility. So we have two sides of a coin. How do I take responsibility and accept that you had every right to leave my life, but I'm mad that you left my life? And they're two very different emotions. And so we have that anger and heartbreak that we're trying to suppress in the name of taking responsibility. And then what does that do? When we suppress pain, when we push it down, what do? We look for something to numb it because we're not acknowledging it. So for me, I was caught in this trap of, I'm taking responsibility. You had every right to leave. You had every right to say, I'm done with this. But then on the other flip side of that, I'm quoting scripture. I'm like, the Bible says a friend loves at all times. I don't think my friends were all people I knew in church and Christian people, and yet they left skid marks getting away from me. And so I thought, what version of the Bible are you holding on to? Because mine says a friend loves at all times, not just in good times. And so there was this definite disconnect between responsibility and dealing with the pain and the hurt from the people who just couldn't be a part of my life anymore. And make no mistake about it, I'm not saying they don't have every right to leave and that it was not my fault. It was. But still, that pain is something that has to be dealt with because it's very real. And people, just like it sounds like, you feel guilty for being upset that someone left, even though you're trying to be accountable. And so that puts you in a really, really rough place. And so, Tammy, we talked about this the first time we talked. I said I had to visit the cemetery of my soul because there were so many graves lined up in my heart that were empty. They had no bodies to fill them because the hardest funerals to attend are the ones for people who are still living. So I'm standing there and I'm looking at the cemetery of my soul, and here's all the memories of times that I had with people I loved, and just the ghosts of their past whispering that they were gone. And so that's incredibly painful. And to deny that, to try to push that down in the name of responsibility, only caused them to haunt me more. Because what do ghosts do? They haunt you. They come back and they haunt you and they haunt you. And eventually, in a weak moment, that's when you're very susceptible to reach for something or fall back to something because you have that pain and you don't have to feel guilty about that pain. I tried to run from those ghosts for a long time. I ran, and no matter what route I took, my destination was the same. The outcome never changed. I was still alone. They were gone. Ultimately, it was my fault they were gone, but I had to grieve that loss. And that's really what it is. It's grief. And that's the reason we have to be able to process that grief at the same time as taking responsibility so that we can come together cohesively and move forward to a healthy, happier space. I was a grief therapist the first 5 years of my career. And a lot of people think, well, you only grieve something if they die or a person who dies. That's not true. Grief applies to any situation, anything that we lose. You can lose a job and grieve it. You can lose your lifestyle and grieve it. And you can, if you get divorced and you didn't want it, you're going to grieve that divorce and you're going to grieve losing that person, even though they still walk the earth. And so knowing and going through that grief is a way that we process and are able to make peace with that responsibility. So the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I just kind of wanted to go over each one of those really quickly because a lot of people aren't aware of the 5 stages. And denial is the first one, where you're just shell shocked and you're like, this isn't happening in my life. And I've always said that denial is, to me, the shock absorber for your soul. Like you're just not quite ready to deal with this. You're just overwhelmed by it. And so what it does, that denial allows you to slowly merge into the reality of what has happened in your life because it's really difficult. Then we go into the bargaining stage. Well, I've quit drinking now. Maybe he'll come back. Or I've quit gambling. Maybe she'll come home. If I turn into my best version of myself, they'll come back. Thinking all of the things that we can do to get someone to return. And ultimately, they don't work because once people have decided I'm out, for the most part, they're gone, especially with addiction, when people have finally said enough is enough. And that's when we ease into that anger one. And anger is an easy one. It is what it is. I'm ticked off. Why is this happening? And everybody can understand, but then you feel like I don't have any right to be angry. I have no right to be angry because this was my fault. And what that does is stop grieving. And grief doesn't just dissipate with time. Grief will wait and wait. When I was a grief therapist, I was at a hospice and we allowed people to come back, whether they had just recently had someone who passed or if they'd moved in from another state. I had a client whose husband had died 50 years prior, but she had never processed that grief. And grief, I always say grief is like fog. It just hangs there until you can work through it. And so a lot of times in recovery, we get to the angry stage and we think I'm not allowed to be angry because this was my fault. But it's a part of grief. And working through that really helps you to move forward, acknowledging I'm angry. I feel betrayed that they left me. I did everything I possibly could, even if I was an addict, and they said they were going to be by me forever. And I stuck by them through hard times. And so anger is an appropriate part of grief. I'm not saying it's an appropriate part of, being angry at the person for leaving, but being angry that all of this has happened in your life is an appropriate part of grief. We have to acknowledge those feelings of anger because if we don't, we're just going to push it down and we're never going to be able to heal. And the next stage then is depression, where you're just like, this is my life. I've brought it on myself. And finally, then acceptance. And I think that the important thing to remember about grief is you don't have to go through those stages. It's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, you can bounce around. You can think you're done with one. I would think there's no way I can be mad anymore. And 4 months later, I'm mad all over again. Something would happen and I would just get angry again. But that's the part of healing. I mean, that's just the way it happens. It isn't linear. It's not a straight line of progression to heal. There's all kinds of jagged backs and forths, and you don't have to beat yourself up over those things. In recovery, we take responsibility for our mistakes and we say, this is me. This is what happened. This is what I did. And in doing that, though, there comes a point in time when you stop there and move forward because you can't beat yourself up into healing. And eventually, I had a friend ask me recently, are you still beating yourself up over, the people who were hurt by your, mistakes and your addictions? And, I thought about it. I said, no, I'm not anymore. Like I spent years having remorse and feeling terrible and having regrets. And it will always be something of which I want to always be cognizant of so it doesn't ever happen again, but I don't have to continue to beat myself up with it for the rest of my life. And in my opinion, I would rather be an honest sinner than a lying hypocrite. And, there's so many people who straddle that line and I just am like, this is what happened. This is who I am, but I'm healing. I'm doing my best. And it's okay for all of us to be able to say that because the important thing is, no matter how it happened, no matter whose fault it was, it hurts to be rejected. it hurts to be discarded. And we have to be able to own that and still take responsibility for the fact we lost those people. And I think it's such a complicated, complex situation, because when I was in treatment, they kept saying, you have to take responsibility, Kelley, you have to be accountable. I'm like, but like, I thought they were my best friends, you know? And so for me, I really struggled with that for probably 2 years of my life, trying to navigate through that and make sense out of it and allow it to become cohesive. Because the really important thing was, I didn't want it to ever happen again. And I think that's the thing that people have to really make sure of. I don't want this to happen again. So I have new people in my life. How am I going to ensure it doesn't happen again? And the way you do that is to process all of those feelings and to say, who am I today? Who was I yesterday? What are the differences? How do I heal? How did everything go wrong from the beginning? Like, where did my train start to go off of the track? And being able to look at those situations and figure out, why am I still here? Because we all have a reason. I mean, at one point I just stopped and thought, what's God doing? Like, why am I even still here? And getting the answer to those questions really helped me to move forward. And I think in every culture in the world, death is seen as transformation. Something changes. And I certainly felt as though I had died in every sense of the word, except for the annoying part that I still had a heartbeat and I had a pulse. I'm like, I'm still here, even though I feel like everything is dead. And the thing is, we want to heal, because as new people and things come into our lives, we don't want them to have to first march through the swampland of our pain to reach us, because no one's going to do that. And if they do, it's probably because they have so much of their own pain that they're numb to what's going on with ours. And so cleaning all of that up, how do we do that? The one thing I knew for sure is I didn't want to lose more people. And that's the biggest thing I hear from my life coaching clients is, I don't want to lose more people. I don't want this to ever happen again. And so how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again? When you've lost everything, you just have to build a new foundation. And you start from just the ground level up. And I think the difficult thing, I just was working with someone yesterday who said, Kelley, like, I'm trying to build this new foundation, but then this happened and that happened, and your structure was fragile and the winds of stress blew it down. And the same thing happened to me. I think the same thing has happened to all of us. And we just have to pick up our pieces again and start rebuilding again, because we're fragile in that new state when we're trying to heal. And so as we're rebuilding and we're gaining emotional strength and resilience, then our structure gets stronger. And as things come at us, it doesn't topple. It doesn't just topple when something happens. And so at that point, like as I was working through rebuilding my structure, I can promise you the ghosts were never far away. You're trying to, just every time I would get some peace kind of echoing down the hallways of my heart, here come the ghosts rattling their chains and getting me all worked up, and my structures, I'm like, whoa. And being able to focus and bring it back in is what allows you to keep gaining strength, to keep gaining resiliency, and to accept the fact that there are people who will no longer be in your world, but you can survive that because you survive it by healing that grief. You acknowledge your responsibility, but you work through your grief at the same time. And they kind of go against each other, but I think it's a crucial part of being able to heal and move forward, because they just feel like they're at odds with that. How am I really taking responsibility if I'm upset that they left? Because you're human, and healing isn't easy. And recovery isn't easy. And you have to accept sometimes the fact that the intentions that were in your heart weren't necessarily received by the other people when you were in the middle of your addiction. And, I think that we look back and we think, oh, I showed him I loved him, I did this and I did that. But our memory is very skewed because we were the one in the middle of an addiction. And being able to say and just make peace with the fact, okay, what I thought I conveyed, what I thought I gave to other people isn't necessarily what they felt. And being able to, for me, that was a big one because I thought, yes, they did. They knew how much, look at everything I did for them. I had all these things, but when I finally healed to the point that I could say, they obviously didn't feel it, and they stated that to me, and being able to say, okay, I own that. Because when you realize you can't change the past and there are ghosts there that need to be put to rest, then you can move forward. And I see so many people who are trying to breathe life into relationships and people that have already been declared dead. And you just can't do that. And they hang on to it. I have several life coaching clients who still think 5 years later, I can get him back. He's married with kids with someone else. He's not coming back, and holding on to that. You've got this empty grave in your heart that what do you do with those empty graves there in your heart? And ultimately that's where I got, is I had to visit each one of those empty graves that was lined up in my heart. And when I did that, I remembered the good times, at least the times I thought were the good times, because realizing and being cognizant of the fact that what I thought was good and what they thought were good wasn't the same thing. I thanked God for the seasons I spent with that person. And then I buried those well wishes. And I just made the decision, this is the last time I visit this grave. I'm going to let this rest in peace so I can truly move forward in my life. Because I'll tell you, grave digging didn't suit me, and it doesn't suit anybody else either. We have to be able to move forward to heal. And unfortunately, we will lose people along the way in the journey of recovery. But healing from that allows you to bring in new people. You've probably had people, Tammy, who have said, I'm just never going to love anybody again. I'm done with it. And well, who can ever get to you and love you with a chip the size of Manhattan on your shoulder? And people say, that's just it. I'm done. I'm just done with that. And that's not really even what they want. They want to be loved. They want to feel accepted. They want to feel compassion. But what they don't want to do is work through the grief. And it's a little bit hard when you have recovery over here saying, take responsibility, it's your fault. So you can take responsibility and you can grieve at the same time. And even if you've gotten recovery, but you haven't grieved those losses, I just really challenge you to do that now. Like, what is in the cemetery of your soul? What graves are full? What graves are empty? What ghosts are still haunting you? Because those things that you don't acknowledge are the things that are going to keep coming back, because the past, what is the quote? The future is the past just lined up through a different gate or something like that. And, that things will continue to happen until you deal with them effectively. And so loss is a very, very painful part of recovery, but working through the grief of those losses and the people that we lose along the way is the way we clear the path for new people to come in and get to know the version of us that we are today, the wonderful, healthy, happy version. And, I heard a song a while back, and one of the lines said, I wish you could have knew me like this. And, it struck me because I thought there are plenty of people that I would love for them to know this version of me, but also very aware of the fact that there was something in the old me that connected with them. And so the new me and them probably wouldn't hit it off because something in them connected with that old me too. And so, we tend to romanticize the past when we look back on it, and being able to just say all of these situations and people need to rest in peace. That way you unchain yourself from the past. You have every right to move forward and find something new. And the way we do that is to heal from that grief. So that's how I work with people on letting go of broken relationships from the past, but also standing strong in the taking responsibility for the mistakes made because of addiction and owning that, but also being able to heal the broken heart, because so many brokenhearted people, there are walking wounded everywhere. And, to try to get a couple more of them to the place that they can move on happily is the goal of healing. So I don't know, Tammy, what do you think?
Great information. And And I had tears well up because I started thinking about people, that I haven't thought about in a long time because I've been in recovery a long time. I had to grieve a number of people. And just like you were talking about, like these people, I thought they were my friends. And, as soon as I started getting into recovery, I had a couple of people that stood by me. And I soon figured out that those were truly my friends that really accepted me on every level. Everybody else was kind of like you said, this is what I did for them or whatever. So it was transactional, or it was on some different level, or when I was in my addiction, that is when I was the palest version of me. Like I was the most self-centered. I was the most, I mean, it was not the person who I've become in recovery. So like you were talking about, if people were hanging around me then, there was a reason why we connected, and it would not have been healthy for me to maintain those relationships ongoing. I did do a lot of letting go of them. Like that was, part of my whole process was letting go of those relationships. But in the last couple of years, there were relationships where the people and they were close to me, they just did not have the bandwidth because of the stuff that was going on in their lives. I had to understand that the relationship was going to shift. I had to grieve the loss of what I had, and just know that that was okay. I mean, but again, like you were talking about, gratitude, for the space that they've played in my life, always wishing them good things, because that feels good for me. If I'm not resentful, of course, this is a process. This was not like a 5 minute, oh yeah, let me just,
Right.
no,
Oh,
no,
dang,
this was like,
fixed
yeah,
it.
no, I had to acknowledge that
Right.
this was grief. Like I had to own that this was grief. And you shared, like, to dig into the grief. I would invite anybody who I like, you can't just shove this stuff on the shelf, in the closet and shut the doors and go, oh, done. No, you
Right.
really do need to address it. But I really do encourage you to have support and guidance on the way, because this is the stuff, particularly for addicts, that is triggering, because it's the pain stuff that we, like you talked about, like, I'm just not going to have any relationships ever, and that is just I don't want to deal with the pain. But we also miss, hang on, sorry. We miss the ability, like all the meaningful stuff in my life is the relationships, like, I have stuff, I have fun, whatever, but it's the people that I'm connected with that is meaningful. So if I shut the door on that, which is what addiction does, it's like compartmentalize, then I'm also missing out on all the good stuff. So, and that's not who I want to be. So I'm willing to take the pain that, every relationship is going to struggle with loss. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to leave. I had a friend during COVID. She loved this woman, and she moved from Arizona to Ohio. She's probably really close to you. And like, I didn't get to say goodbye to her because of COVID, like the whole situation, huge loss for me, and I had to acknowledge, I mean, we stay in touch and all that kind of stuff, but like, to not be able to give her a hug and say, I'm going to miss you and you are so meaningful in my life, was a loss. I
Yeah.
own it,
That's a big
So,
loss.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I,
I love, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the powerful things too is that, and this is like, I think just the story of my life, is how odd is it that the lost and found are contained in the same box, you
Oh,
know?
interesting. Yeah.
And did you ever think about that? And that the very place that we lost ourselves is where we find ourselves. And so, while all of the chaos that destroyed my life is ultimately what bloomed on the grave of what was once my life. And so we find ourselves in that chaos. But certainly, like you said, time doesn't heal anything, but healing does take time. So it isn't, where you said, oh, it was a quick process. No. And my forward movement in my healing literally stalled until I was able to make sense of, I'm allowed to grieve, but I have to take responsibility. And I think I was speaking to a friend about this the other night, and he just was brought to tears. And he said, just hearing you talk about it, immediately, I went back to relationships that I know I haven't resolved the loss. and he didn't even struggle with addiction. So I think it's in every part of life, and, you know, being able to process those losses and then move forward. Where's your
Yeah,
friend at in Ohio?
uh, um, she's by Cleveland.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So I know it's a bigger state, but yeah. So, but I was thinking too, like my picker for relationships on any level, friends or whatever, was really broken when um, uh when I'm in my addiction, because like it's, you know, and I'll own this, it was use and abuse. You know, it was like, you know, mutual use and abuse. It's like, what did you have that I wanted? What, how could we, you know, how could we interact that was useful for me? You know,
yeah,
honestly, only cared about you if it worked for me. You know, that's
right.
what addiction
That's
is
every
being completely
addict,
self-centered. Yeah.
right?
So I needed people to teach me how to have a better picker, you know, to so that I
Yes.
could pick out friends that weren't going to just be in that use and abuse, that I wasn't going to just look for how can I take from them, you know, for my betterment. So you know, it is a process. I share, you know, with partners in particular, you know, but it's true for addicts too. It's like, you know, we talk about, we've got a couples healing from betrayal workshop, and we talk about grieving losses together, because it's a loss of what you hoped for, what you thought you had. You know, all of that is a huge loss, and recognizing that there is grief associated with this person. You know, if you're in a marriage, this person that I said I do to, that, you know, said we're going to love each other, we're going to be there for each other for all our lives, and then this person betrayed that whole thing. And you know, I mean, it's just a huge, there's a loss that needs to be grieved as part of moving forward. Many couples can heal and move forward, but if you don't acknowledge the loss of what you thought you had, you know, that's that ghost that's hanging around all the time. So
Right.
you've got bunches of questions, so let's start.
Okay. Hit me with him.
All right. I'm trying to deal with, this is from a female. I'm trying to deal with a possible eating disorder on top of betrayal trauma. I've totally lost all control. There was a time when I could at least stay on top of it. It took my husband's sex addiction coming out to make me realize, all in caps, I never had control. Presently, I'm using diet caffeinated sodas and extra food to numb the pain. I don't know how to heal from the eating disorder and handle the pain of the trauma at the same time. That is so raw. That is so real. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think um, the first thing on the to-do list is the trauma, because um, until you can get the trauma started, everything else is probably going to be a second or a third on the list. And once you start working on the trauma, and we do this in the group I do with Dr. Nina, the Binge Free Babes, we from the beginning say we're not going to get weighed. We're not going to do that, because it's not about what you're eating. It's about what's eating you. And so, and we get them to start realizing what feelings they're feeling when they're reaching for food, when they're doing that, and associating and then what's that tied to? What's the link to trauma, or what's the link to pain, or what's the link to abuse that feeling reminds you of, and we work through that. So I think that's why it's really important to focus on the trauma first. And I realize with an eating disorder, many times we have to try to work on both at the same time. And so being able to look at both. And in fact, Dr. Nina's book, The Binge Cure, I don't know what their eating disorder is, but her book, The Binge Cure, is a great recommendation for that, because it identifies emotions with what you're reaching for, what type of food you're eating. And like I said, we work through that in the group, but that is a process that you can do simultaneously, working on the trauma and also the eating. But the core of it all, and I actually have a post I'm making this week of, can we quit talking about obesity? Can we quit talking about dieting? Can we talk about pain? Because that's what's behind it. And so, that's what you just really have to dig into, the pain, I think, first. And that is a great book, by the way, The Binge Cure, because it can help you start recognizing what you're reaching for, because that's the key. When you go for, oh, I just ate 2 whole pizzas, if you're a binger, but what were you feeling when you did it? What was triggered right before you decided to do it? And so there's a link to all of that, to each eating disorder, even if you're not if you're not a binger, if you're someone who's struggling with anorexia or whatever it is, there's still a feeling that's triggered by that. And that's a control, you know, that's a level of control you can have, just so is binging. And so zeroing in on that trauma, there's no quick way to heal it. And there's no quick way, just like to deal with addiction. And so she has herself in a really painful place, with everything within her marriage and her husband's addiction and her trauma. So I would recommend zeroing in on the trauma first. But that is a great book. And I think she could find a lot in that book that she would probably be able to put into practice to help her with the eating disorder while she's working on the trauma.
Yeah, and what I also hear is some shame about I have no control and I'm doing all of this. So I would invite you, like stick a post-it note on the pantry. Can I choose something differently? And if you can't, you can't. But then at the end of the day, kind of go, yeah, that time I chose to go for a walk instead of reaching for the chips or whatever. So give yourself some credit even for little tiny victories, in all of this. And I think for me, I had to learn that I was worth choosing differently, that I had value to choose something that was better for me, regardless of the chaos going on in my world, and eating has always been an issue, in my life. I've struggled with some aspect of it, always. And it doesn't have the power it had over me. I still have to be careful because it's the thing that's most triggering for me. But just making one choice that is a positive in my book, that time I didn't reach for that. I chose carrots or whatever, great, but I'm so glad you're here. Keep joining the sexandrelationshiphealing.com drop-in groups for betrayed partners. There is one today at 12:30 p.m. So it's Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. Join that. There's another one tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Get support. You are not alone. So I'm so glad you're here. Okay, next question. I'm wondering what grief process my husband is going through giving up long-term affair partners. He cut contact with the other woman to recover from his addiction and to recover our marriage. I like, just like Kelley was talking about with the grief, it's like there are the loss of acting out. Like I had to grieve the loss of being able to go, use chemicals like everybody. I mean, like there's a loss associated with not being able to go to our go-to coping mechanisms and having to deal with reality, which is a smack in the face.
Right.
So I'm sure. So
right.
What are your thoughts?
I'm not so sure, and I don't know the situation, so it's hard to give a clinical response, but I wouldn't be so certain he's grieving the person as much as he has that sense of deprivation of what I run to for my addiction. When I couldn't gamble anymore, I didn't grieve gambling, but I had that deprivation of my outlet to numb my pain. And so I think perhaps for her, it might be important to be able to say, it's not that he's grieving her. He's lost his outlet to numb his pain. And, like I always say, food is the Band-Aid. Let's talk about the wound. Well, the Band-Aid's ripped off and he doesn't have a new bandage. So it's not probably so much about missing that person as much as it is his deprivation of what's numbing his pain. And so I think you don't help somebody grieve losing that person. You help them deal with their trauma and getting appropriate ways to get an appropriate Band-Aid, not a Band-Aid that hurts both of you.
Yeah, and grieving losses together. You lost what you thought you had when you married him.
100%.
He has not been that person.
Right.
The relationship you thought you had for whatever period of time you've been together wasn't as you hoped it was. So you are both in a grief process.
Absolutely. There's a lot of grieving going on there. I just meant probably not grieving about missing the.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I'm grieving the ability to go act out, and I hope that he hasn't chosen some other form. I hear too often, now this person's smoking cannabis, all day, or they're shopping, or they're gaming, or they're whatever. So like having to experience the grief, having to experience uncomfortable, unpleasant feelings is challenging. So again, like I was saying earlier, you know, as I think this really does require support, to walk through the process. So this is I have been grieving the loss of my first husband, who was missing, found alive, and died on the commute to the hospital in 2008. I still do not know exactly what happened to him. It's really hard to live in peace not knowing the exact details. How can I get to a better place to accepting the fact that I will never have answers? I always wake up wondering what happened and then go on with my day, but always inside my mind. That's really challenging.
Yeah, that's grief is something that when we don't have answers can really hang around and not allow us to process it. And there's such a complex process to accepting that we'll never know. And that's incredibly painful and incredibly difficult. And being able to, whether you believe in God or you have a higher power or the universe or whatever it is that you put your faith into, at some point, being able to release that and say, I'm going to have to make peace with the fact I'll never know, because it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. It's gut wrenching for someone that you love to have lost them that way and then never have answers. And there just comes a time when you have to be able to say, I have to let this go because I'm still here and I'm still alive and working through. Did they say in 2008? Is that what they said? 2000?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You can
So,
follow along at the bottom. If you click Q&A, you can follow along with
okay.
me.
Okay.
I
Oh,
should
there
have
they
told you
are.
that. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, yeah, that's 13 years. And, part of grief work is being able to, just like addiction, is being able to accept the things you cannot change and the things you can, and knowing the difference. And it sounds simple, and this is just such an incredibly painful situation, but being able to eventually hand it over and release it from your shoulders, because there may be a day you do find out and there may not be a day, but to be tied to that and chained to that unknowing doesn't let you go forward to your future. And after 13 years, I think you just have to be able to, and then when it pops in your head first thing in the morning, you have to be able to say, I've released it. I've released it and I'm going through this day. I acknowledge that you happened, but you're not going to monopolize my thoughts today. And I had to do that with a lot of my trauma, because thoughts just continue to resurface and we have to be able to put them where they need to go. I acknowledge you happened, but you're over here. And not just you're over here, because then that's ignoring the pain, but
Mhm.
I acknowledge you. I acknowledge this happened, but I have to live my life. And then hopefully it begins to dissipate a little bit.
Well, and if you've not done any trauma work around this is a traumatic event, and not everybody has events. This is a traumatic event. Sometimes it's the perpetual trauma of betrayal, et cetera. But I would really encourage you to do. I mean, it's so present for you. Like you're talking about every day waking up with this. That is a burden, and I would really encourage you to do some trauma work with a qualified person to see if you get a little relief from that, so that you can, so that it takes it back a notch at least, and then you're more able to deal with it mindfully. So, okay, next question. I struggle with how to grieve over ambiguous end of my marriage, and I don't want. What I mean by this is my wife asked for a divorce in November, but last month I stayed the night with her in her bed, minimal physical contact. I'm sure if I'm in the denial stage because this happened, or if I should not grieve the loss of my marriage, because there will still be a chance. She is still proceeding with the divorce. I struggle to be in one of the 5 stages of grief, as it appears to have ambivalent feelings towards me. Is there a confused stage? Well, you're clearly in the confused stage, but
The
I also
confused
hear
stage would be
the
called,
addict, and like I remember the first, like when I first got into recovery, like I didn't understand and I couldn't identify anything. So like I can understand I am confused. Is there, how do I name these? So thoughts?
Yes, because the confused stage is a combination of denial and bargaining. Maybe she wants me back. I spent the night there. Maybe we'll still get together. Do you see that bargaining in there? And then the I don't really know what's happening. I'm confused. Is still some of that. I'm not quite ready to, accept what's happening and trying to merge into, okay, this is happening. It sounds to me like he's very close to getting to where because he's not just saying, hey, she must care, I spent the night, he's saying in the message here, she's still proceeding with the divorce. And so a lot of times what people won't say, their actions will. And, I think there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of gray area when people are separating and divorcing, and people fall back into what is comfortable sometimes. And so I think the confusion and is a mix between denial and bargaining. And because you can always put everything into a stage. Of course you're confused. And she let you spend the night and sleep in her bed. Who wouldn't be confused by that? That's a very, very valid feeling. I can see you being confused and frustrated and heartbroken. I didn't want the divorce and I'm spending the night with you and that gives me hope. But is it false hope? Because false hope is a really cruel thing to give someone. And so, being able, I was trying to see here, she asked for the divorce in November, but in December I spent the night. Yeah, I think if she's still proceeding with the divorce, then I think you probably need to really take a look at, okay, how am I feeling? And just work through those stages because, work through what you are feeling. Do you have a right to be annoyed and confused and ticked off? Yes. Like she let you spend the night with her. And then she's saying, but I'm still going forward with this divorce. Whether there was physical contact or not, you spent the night in the bed. And so I would feel the same way that you feel. I would be like, what is this mixed message I'm receiving? And mixed messages are incredibly difficult and painful to deal with. So my grandma always told me, don't pay attention to what people say, pay attention to what they do. And so I think that her actions show she's still proceeding. And so I would recommend moving forward, just working on your grief and accepting that this can't be changed. And then if something does happen along the way, that she says, hey, I'm going to withdraw this and I'm not going, then deal with that at the time. But right now, what's in front of you is she's still proceeding. And I'm sure that's very painful and has to feel like a slap in the face after what happened. So I think, just really allowing yourself to process the pain because it's a loss. It's a loss. And I think a lot of times it's harder to deal with the loss of someone in this way than losing someone to death, because losing someone in death is incredibly painful, but they couldn't help that they died. But when someone chooses to leave us, then you're dealing with rejection and, with being discarded, so to say, like I said earlier. And not that one is easier than the other, but it's a different type of grief. All grief is difficult, but, without having more of the details, I think all you can do is, in this case, follow her lead because it's out of your control.
Yes. And I agree. And it's like, I'm the end of a marriage that I don't want to have end. So it's the loss of her, but it's also the loss of the relationship and what you'd hope for and everything else. So it is a loss. And it is confusing because of, the mixed messages, but, the more you can do to own the feelings, I don't want this to end. I'm angry that it isn't, I'm depressed, whatever, wherever you are. I'm glad you're here getting support. I say this all the time with addicts too. It's like, or partners, I say, what the words are doesn't matter. What the actions are is what matters. So your grandma is right. So,
yes.
Okay. Next question. I'm in denial that this man in my life is not really my friend and has used me to get his fix because he's in denial of his orientation. Either a compulsion or a fetish. I lost 225 pounds and I have body issues, and he's the first person I've been able to feel comfortable with sexually. He didn't judge me. How do I get this denial phase to stop and wake up to the reality that I cannot have him in my life any way, shape, or form? How do I embrace the pain of losing him? Mm.
I'm kind of confused. Okay, I'm in denial that this man in my life is not really my friend and has used me to get his fix because he's in denial of his orientation. So has he ended this relationship because she said, how do I get this, or he, whichever it might be, I don't know, he, she, whatever. How do I
It's two
get,
he's.
okay,
So
how do
yeah.
I,
So
I can't read the letters. They're really little. So that's why I said.
oh, interesting. Okay, so let me go back and read it again. I'm
Well,
in
no, I
denial
mean,
that. Oh, okay.
right. I meant the name is littler and I couldn't read it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so they're still together. They're not actually apart right now. He's just saying, I don't want to, I can't have this.
Because this person is not safe for him.
Okay,
So, but he's
right.
also in denial about, I mean, it's making that difficult decision of like, this person is not safe for me. Kind of like we're talking about, but on the flip side of it, it's like, okay, the people that left us because we were not safe for them,
Right. And this is, I think, falls into self-respect too and self-worth. Like if someone can't give us what we want and what we know we deserve, how do we walk away from it? Because I did this my entire existence. I would deal with men who I really wanted to be in a relationship with, but they didn't treat me well. And I tolerated it and I had a hard time leaving them. But in hindsight, I realized, I mean, I would chase after a man who treated me terrible, but because I didn't want to be rejected. So they're like not giving me what I wanted, not be giving in and committing to me was like almost like crack to me. I had to go after it. I had to chase after it because I couldn't deal with the rejection otherwise, because that rejection would say I really wasn't worth it. I wasn't enough for this person to commit to me. And so I think, he sounds that he said, how do I embrace the pain of losing him? I think you just sometimes we have to be able to say, as much as I care about you and as much as I would love to have you in my life, you aren't capable of giving me what I need and what I want. And being able to just say, and that hurts me because I really, really cared about you. In my book, I have a letter I wrote to a man in treatment that I loved very much, but same thing. I mean, he could probably swap places with this guy, that he just wasn't, he didn't love me and he wasn't giving me anything back and he was taking. But how did I break that unhealthy bond that I had with him because I just craved him and I adored him. And so, I wrote a letter from treatment and I put it in my book. And because I had to begin to say, I have to love me more than I love you. And especially when you don't give me what I need and what I want. And so being able to say, this may not even be about me loving you. This is probably about me being willing to accept less than I deserve. And I want to dig into that and figure out why you seem so attractive to me and you seem so irresistible to me when you treat me like crap. So what is it about my situation and my self-worth that I continue to deal with that? And then it might flip from, I'm not really grieving you, I'm trying to heal me.
That was very useful. Thank you. Okay, somebody posted in the chat. I'm still grieving my cat that died a year ago. I had him for 10 years. Any advice? Pets like have footprints on our hearts. It's so hard.
Yes. I think there's just some losses that we always will grieve. I have animals that have passed on as well. And I grieve them. I remember them. I swear I can still smell them. And I try to just remember them with love and remember the joy of it. And if the tears fall and it still hurts, that's because I loved them. And I don't think there's ever a statute of limitations on missing someone that we love. I consider pets, you probably hear this beast of mine behind this door scratching right now, wanting out. And I love them just like they're humans. And so just like I will miss my mom for the rest of my life, I will miss all of my pets too. And so I think it's okay to just say, if I feel sad today and I miss my cat, I'm going to cry about it. I'm going to acknowledge that my cat was a wonderful part of my life. And I would rather have experienced that amazing love and grieve their loss than to have never experienced it. So I just suggest honoring your animal, honoring your lost loved one, being able to say, you really mattered to me. You were such a blessing and I miss you. And allow yourself to cry and be sad about it. I don't think that there'll never be a day in my life that I'm just like, oh, I'm over losing my mom. That it's okay. We move it into a healthy place of, sometimes I remember some things, and if I want to cry, I cry because those tears say I loved you and I don't have to repress them. So I think sometimes just giving ourselves permission to grieve is okay too, because grief is a forever thing.
And with pets, so I lost my beloved cat, and I was traveling a lot, and my husband was like, "You can't get another cat," because I knew it never just replaces, but it fills a void. So, but he was like, "You can't get another cat until you're home enough to bond with it." And so then I finally was home, and so then I was on the hunt for a cat, and I had specific qualifications, and like they had to be very needy. It had to be a female. It had to be very needy, and it had to be pretty in my eyes and all this kind of stuff. So I went and looked for cats, and like there were a number of them that didn't, like, they were aloof and walked as cats do. And then the one I have now, like, she came up and she sat on my chest and all of this kind of stuff. And she's a great cat for me. What I didn't have was that she had to be smart, and she's not the brightest bulb in the box, but she's the perfect cat for me. So at some point, getting a new pet that I can love and show affection to, realizing that they are not a replacement for the previous one, but they're just a new place for me to love on and snuggle with, is my dog is like, he's out there barking too, but like, he's my running buddy, he's my hiking buddy, he's such a companion for me, that, like, I can't imagine not having him. We got him as a puppy. I can't believe we got a puppy at this point in our lives, but we did. And he's 3 years old now, and he's naughty sometimes, but I still adore him. So it may be one of those where you go, is there room in my heart, to take in, rescue a cat? That maybe it doesn't change the grief of I still look at pictures of I've got one of those frames that revolves pictures, and I've got the cat that died a few years ago on that, and I see her and go, oh, but
I have a
it's all
table.
good.
I have a table in my house that has the ashes of our dogs that have
Oh,
passed, and each box that our vet puts them in has a picture on the front. And so I
oh,
have
nice.
them each there, and I have a sign that's a wooden sign that says, "I thank my God for you." And I just
Yes.
I'm thankful for the parts of our lives that they, took up. And so for the seasons that we had them, I think that's the painful thing about pets, is we know when we get them that if things go the way it's supposed to go, we will outlive them.
Hmm.
And that's a painful reality of it. And, but I just honor them. I know, like, I was a grief counselor for many years, but I honor them. If somebody wants to cry, I'm like, cry, get it out. Don't
Hmm.
push them back,
Hmm. Hmm.
because that's how we heal. And I hope there's never a time that I think of my mom, that if I really think of it and if I want to cry, that I would be like, I'm not going to cry, because I think the tears say the wound mattered. And
Yes, the relationship mattered. That's,
yeah,
how lucky are we that we had something that mattered. So
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. We are out of time. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Kelley. I'll look forward, and I know that March will be here before you know it. Kelley will be back the first week of March, which I bet is the 3rd of, because February has 28 days. So I bet it will be the 3rd of March. So join us again. You can find Kelley on her website too, Kelley, KelleyGunter.com. So
No
check
H.
her out.
No
What?
H.
What did I say?
No,
Oh,
no
I'm sorry.
H.
All right, you spell it.
It's Kelley Gunter, KelleyGunter. And then I'm on Facebook. I'm the most active on Instagram, actually, at Gunter Kelley. But I respond to all messages that anybody sends me, whether it's on my website, on Facebook, or on Instagram. So it might take me a couple of days, but I always respond to all of them, except the marriage proposals. I don't.
Oh, we have to talk about that separately sometime. I can't wait to hear it. Oh,
Right.
that is hysterical. Okay. All right. On that note, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.